Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. With Iran asserting its right to nuclear enrichment and the U.S. amassing its greatest air power in the Middle East since 2003, the region faces both military and economic vulnerabilities. Iranian proxies, drones, and the strategic Strait of Hormuz could provide Tehran leverage, even as European governments call for caution. And now to analyze the latest, we turn to Marcin Styszyński, assistant professor at the Department of Arabic and Islamic Studies, Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań. Good to have you on TVP World. Welcome back.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
I want to begin with the latest. We're hearing reports that on Saturday there have been new demonstrations of students at several universities in Iran. I mean, does this come at a time where, let's say, this is on these 40 days of mourning marking that, or is this now a new movement of the Iranians rising up against the regime?
It's a good question. Indeed, yesterday we could observe some new demonstrations of young people, including students. But we must point out that usually, or so far in Iran, these demonstrations were rather spontaneous, like it happened in the past. Just to mention a wave of demonstrations during 2022 after the death of Mahsa Amini, a young girl in Iran. So the problem is that we still don't have a precise or consolidated opposition in Iran, and any changes in this field is very challenging in Iran for many years.
Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you, Professor, I mean, in terms of also, we have certain losses. I mean, we have different reports of that last month, anywhere between 3,000, 5,000, 6,000, possibly more deaths, brutal crackdown by the regime. How much does that memory impact both what the Iranian side, the government authorities will do if this grows, and at the same time, does this, let's say, hem in the response by the protesters?
It's also an important question because, in fact, it's hard to assess the ongoing casualties and brutal and violent crackdown of the protests because we have different sources. Some of them are mentioning more than 40,000 deaths. The toll is growing according to the source. We should also mention that still we have the crackdown of the internet in Iran. So any credible data in this field is hard to assess. We have different sources in this field. However, we have this brutal and violent crackdown of the latest protest in Iran.
Mm-hmm. And also, let's talk about that military build-out. We've been covering this now for some days, but it just seems to be increasing. We know pretty much that we have two large aircraft carrier groups that the United States has deployed to the region, destroyers, fighter jets, the biggest air power in the region since 2003. I mean, this isn't to be taken lightly. Let's say, it's difficult now to answer, but how serious do you think this is going to be? Is it now a deterrent still, or is this really just getting ready until everything's in place for the Americans to strike? And what would a strike look like?
Yes, this is also an important question. Apart from the military details you've just mentioned, we should note that this reinforcement aims at decreasing of any military, political, also capacities and potential of Iran, especially in the context of the new initiative Board of Peace, which is just announced last week. So it's our response to pro-Iranian policy in the region, in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about also the wider region. If, let's say, the United States does carry out whatever kind of strategic strikes, if it does come to that, there likely would be in some way an involvement of Israel to some capacity. If we scale it out, what are the possible scenarios here? How could this widen? What kind of proxies at this point does Iran have? I mean, the Houthis have been damaged, Hezbollah as well. What's the, let's say, power of those proxies in case this does escalate?
Yeah, you've mentioned a very important question because indeed pro-Iranian strongholds are rather neutralized. In Lebanon, Hezbollah, in Yemen, Houthi, their military capacities is very weakened. Besides Hamas itself also. So it seems that Iran is the last stronghold in the region, as I mentioned, which blocks the new initiative, the Board of Peace, and which is a kind of extended initiative of the Abraham Accords. But however, the main question is any post-regime or any political scenarios after the collapse of the potential collapse of the regime in Iran, because that's the most challenging and complicated question, especially if we assess and explore the internal situation in Iran. Just as I mentioned, the opposition is weakened. We have rather spontaneous protests. Main opposition leaders are outside Iran, are abroad, such as monarchists, for instance, because recently monarchists are dominating the local political or Iranian political scene. But however, we also must mention that Iran relies on the concept of wilayat al-faqih. So it means that the supreme leader, which is Ali Khamenei, is the main player in the country. So any replacement of this leader is very complicated because we need a credible personality. It's the hierarchy among Shia leaders and etc. So apart from military scenarios, I think that it's very hard to predict and to assume any political scenarios. So we have similarities like we had in Iraq in 2003. We easily neutralized the regime of Saddam Hussein, but it was very hard to rebuild the country, which was based on Baath Party, for instance. So that's a challenging question, this post-regime, post-Ayatollah regime scenarios in Iran.
Yeah. I want to ask you also, you mentioned that the regime is weakened, but remains still defiant, still with capabilities. They still retain credible assets, also many thousands apparently of missiles that they could use. Also, I want to just get your sense of the statement by the Iranian president just recently in the last sort of 24 hours, who've said that we will, I'm quoting here, we will not bow down in the face of any of these difficulties. World powers are lining up with cowardice to force us to bow our heads. Now, obviously, that's a strong political statement. That could be just a rhetoric there. But given the situation we're in, how is that going to be perceived? How is that political capital for him if a strike goes ahead? How powerful are those words from the president?
As I said, the role of the president is not so huge, especially that the supreme leader is the main player in the country. But however, of course, there, as you mentioned, it's quite it's rather a rhetoric for internal audiences, of course. But yes, still, of course, as you mentioned, missiles are still pose threats regional threats. Just to remember that during the so-called the 12th war in June last year, some of rocket missiles struck or hit Israel. So they neutralize the Iron Dome, for instance. So that's why we had this reply from the United States against military bases in Iran. So this, but however, that's I think that's rather a political question, because we should remember that at the first step during the erupt of the protests in January, this year, we heard about support of protesters. Now, once again, we are hearing about, we can hear about the nuclear program. So there is an open question whether we are talking about any military capacities of Iran or the change of the regime. Mm-hmm. Besides, just to mention also, there's it should be verified, this source, but just yesterday, the foreign minister of Iran received a closed envelope from the United States in Oman, but he even didn't open it. So it's also kind of indication that tensions are increasing between the two sides.
Mm-hmm. And also, I'm just we have history as a, let's say, guide for us here. Last time the revolution broke out in '79, that was successful because of some of the military elements ended up flipping for the support of the revolution there. Is there any way you see here that there could, if we go through the direction of really radical change, that, for instance, the IRGC, this harsh guard corps, changes its loyalty in some way? Is that one of the scenarios, or is that unlikely?
That's also a very good question, because Iran Revolutionary Guard is a separate paramilitary groups, including Basij, also paramilitary group, which played an important role during the crackdown of the ongoing protests in Iran. So we have different groups, but I think we shouldn't forget about this idea of hierarchy and the idea of Wilayat al-Faqih in Iran. That's the idea which gather different political and social groups so far. So I don't see any replacement, any ideological or political replacement of this trend. If it will be a completely different situation and political trend in the country. Of course, we have new generations which already forgotten the period of the Islamic Revolution in '79. But however, as I mentioned, they are rather spontaneous. They are not consolidated, and it's hard to say that we have a strong opposition. I think one of the scenarios in the West especially is a return of the monarchy, but this scenario is also complicated because within Iranian society, remembers very well the coup d'etat in 1951 when the democratic power of Mohammad Mossadegh was neutralized. And including, of course, secret police Savak. So the monarchy, I'm not quite sure if it's a good solution for the country.
All right, on that, we have many scenarios. Sorry to jump in there. Unfortunately, we do have to close it. So many scenarios. We'll be waiting anxiously what happens next. Yes. We'll, of course, analyze it as it does happen. Thanks so much for all that, Professor Marcin Styszyński there from University, Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World throughout the day for more news and commentary. Goodbye.